Hey, what's going on, guys? Brian from Zombie Guitar here. Here in this lesson, I want to talk about how to get that Spanish type of sound out of your playing, similar to what I was doing in the demo in the beginning. So there's going to be 5 parts to this lesson, so there's 5 key points. So they are, number 1, we're going to look at the chord progression, a typical chord progression to get to achieve this type of sound. Number 2, we're going to take a look at always having an awareness of where the 5th interval is within the key scale that you're playing in. And then the third part is going to be switching to the harmonic minor scale over the 5 chord within the key. The fourth part is going to be playing the full arpeggio of the 5 chord when that chord occurs. And then the 5th part is going to be using diminished arpeggios within this chord progression. All right, so diminished arpeggios are actually a lot easier than they may seem. I remember that I used to be very intimidated when I heard the word diminished, but it's actually a lot easier than you may think. So you're going to find all that stuff out in this lesson. All right, so before we get started, I always like to say, take a look at my website if you haven't already, zombieguitar.com. Every single one of my lessons that's on YouTube, plus more, are all freely available on my website, but they're all nicely organized into categories. And then every video lesson also comes with a written lesson, including all the fretboard diagrams, chord charts, and any other visual stuff that I use in my videos. All that is part of the free membership of my website. I then have a full access members area of my website where there's 3,000 plus videos containing courses, mini courses, solo analysis videos, video backing tracks, all kinds of cool stuff. All that is on zombieguitar.com. So take a look at that. I think you'll really like it. So let's get started with the video. Okay, so the first thing that you want to understand about this is that primarily it's going to be done in a minor key. So in the beginning I was playing the key of A minor. The second thing you want to understand is that if you're considering the A minor to be your 1 chord, the 5 chord in relation to that is going to be made major. All right, so if you look at the circle of fifths, you look at your key of A minor, you can see your diatonic chords are in this grouping of 6. Within the key of A minor, you should have an E minor if you want it to be 100% diatonic to this key, but you take that and you make it major instead. All right, so if you're calling A minor your minor 1 chord, E would be your 5 chord, make that major, you have a major 5 chord. So that combination right there, minor 1, major 5, that is a distinction that that gives it this characteristic sound. And you can write progressions using other diatonic chords that are part of this key, but just make sure to keep that 5 chord to be major. One common one is A minor to G major to F major to E major. So that's something like this. Alright, so I'm sure you heard that progression before. That E major really has that strong pull back to the A minor chord, and it's very characteristic to the sound. So that's the first thing to understand about this. All right, so the second thing that you want to have an awareness of is you want to know your key scale. So we're in the key of A minor for this lesson, so your key scale is going to be the A minor scale. The A minor scale can be played all up and down the fretboard in many different positions, many different patterns, but just keep in mind that's your overall scalar framework. In addition to that, you want to have an awareness of where the fifth is within that key scale. Okay, so that fifth is really going to be one of the characteristic notes. So again, if A is your scale root in the key of A minor, A would be considered your 1. So the fifth of A is E, so you want to have an awareness of where the E is in relation to the A. So what you see here is your A minor scale spanned all up and down the entire fretboard. All of the white dots are your note A. All of the black dots are the rest of the notes of the A minor scale. So it's pretty easy to find the fifth in relation to your roots as long as you know where your roots are, because usually it's on the same fret but just on a lower string, with the exception of the B string because everything's shifted once you get to the B string. So for example, if you take a look at your 7th fret of the D string, which is the note A right here, your E would be on the same fret but on the A string instead. So here's your E, which is the 5th. All right. If you wanted to look at this A up here on the 12th fret of the A string, your 5th is going to be on the 12th fret of the E string. If you look at this A up here, 14th fret of the G string, your 5th is going to be on the 14th fret of the D string. All right, things change once you get to the B string. Here's your A here on the 10th fret of the B string. So your 5th is going to be on the G string and then 1 fret back. So right here. All right, so when you're noodling around in this scale, you're playing various different scale patterns and whatnot, try and keep an awareness of where that 5th is. One note below the 5th is that blue note. So if you know your pentatonic scale and you're used to playing the pentatonic scale, playing the blues scale and stuff like that, one note lower than the 5th is the blue note. So let's look right here, for example, this little 5th to 8th fret area, that would be your pentatonic position number 1. All right, so you know where your A is, that's your scale root. You know where your 5th is, it's the same fret but on the A string. 1 half step lower is your blue note. Okay, so all right, so you can do cool little chromatic runs by doing the 5th and then hitting the blue note and then going to the next note above the 5th, which is also part of the scale. So all right, so you can do that anywhere, any position you want. All right, 5th, add in that blue note. Other than that, just keep in mind of, you're in the key of A minor. So this is more of an intermediate lesson, so I kind of assume that you know how to play in key already. All right, so the next 3 parts of this lesson are going to be a little bit more advanced. So the first 2 parts is just like you know your key. You basically play the key scale and just have an awareness of where a certain note is within that key scale, and then just kind of noodle around over top of all the chords. Just doing that alone is going to give you a pretty cool Spanishy type of sound. Okay, the chord progression is really going to dictate the sound, and just playing in key is going to get you sounding pretty good, okay, especially when you're focusing on that 5th. But you can do stuff to really kind of enhance this sound by focusing on what to play over the 5 chord. So as I said, if you're treating the A minor chord as your 1 chord, then the E major would be your 5 chord. So parts 3, 4, and 5 of this lesson are going to be what to do over that 5 chord. So the first thing you want to do is switch to the harmonic minor scale. So the harmonic minor scale is just simply just 1 note different from that of the natural minor scale. So let's just look in one position here. We're going to look in this 4th to 8th fret region. So your A natural minor scale is going to be this. All right, so everywhere that you see a white dot, that is your note A, that is your scale root. The harmonic minor note is 1 half step below that. So if you take your natural minor scale you find the 7th note and just raise that by 1/2 step, you would have, instead of this, you would have this. So everywhere that you have an A, which is your scale root, 1/2 step below that is going to be that harmonic minor note. All right, so that's not to say that you can't use the other note as well that we just raised. You can, but just kind of try and keep in mind to raise that note every time this 5 chord is occurring. So that's why on my fretboard diagrams I give both. I have the full A natural minor scale, but then I include a gray dot which represents that harmonic minor note, that raised 7th. Okay, so that raised 7th sounds good over the E major chord. And the reason it sounds good over the E major chord is because that one note is the one note that makes the E major chord a major chord instead of a minor chord, if that makes sense. Okay, so that note right there is this note right here, which is the E major chord, which is the difference between the E major chord and the E minor chord. Alright, so that one note, which makes it an E major chord, is the harmonic minor note. Therefore, that's the note that you want to kind of target over the E major chord. So you noodle around in your A minor scale over all the other chords. And then when you get to that E major chord, see how it's starting to sound more exotic now that you're using this harmonic minor scale. It's only one note difference, but when used properly over that one chord, it really gives a cool sound. Alright, so another thing that you can do over this major 5 chord is to play the arpeggio of that chord. So the major 5 chord in the key of A minor, we're calling A minor our 1 chord, we're calling E major our 5 chord, our major 5 chord. So every time an E major chord occurs, you're going to play an E major arpeggio. So there's arpeggio shapes all up and down the entire neck of the guitar. If you know your cage system, if you don't know your cage system, I have some links to that below. But if you know your cage system, you can find all these different arpeggio shapes. So you can play E major in the open position like this. You can play E major using the D shape. You can play E major using the C shape. You can play E major using the A shape. You can play E major using the G shape. You can play E major using the E shape. Okay, so E major arpeggios are all up and down the entire neck of the guitar. So no matter where you happen to be, you're soloing in your A minor scale, you're noodling over this chord progression, playing the A minor scale as your overall scalar framework, but then that E major chord comes along, you're going to play an E major arpeggio. All right, so if you are not super good at finding the cage shapes in various different areas of the fretboard, you can use what you learned in part 2 and part 3 of this lesson to kind of help you get a starting point. So in part 2, we found the 5th of this scale. Okay, so as long as you know where all your A's are, you can find the 5th pretty easily. So the 5th of A is E. So E is one of the arpeggio notes that we're trying to find. Okay, so and then in part 3, we talked about switching to the harmonic minor scale by finding that harmonic minor note, which I use a gray dot to indicate. So that's another one of the notes of the E major chord. So you already know where 2 of the 3 notes of the E major chord are. So that should give you a pretty good starting point to find the nearest cage shape that you're looking for. So let's say I'm here in this area, 4th to 8th fret region. I'm noodling around in my A minor scale. Okay, so I know my A's there on the 7th fret of the D string. I know the 5th of A is found on the same fret but on the A string. So that's the note E, that's the 5th, that's one of the notes I'm looking for. I also know where my harmonic minor note is. Alright, so I know where this is. So I already know 2 of the notes. That is a pretty good indication of which cage shape is going to be the one that I'm looking for within this particular area. So right, so anywhere that I have an A, so here's an A, a fifth below A would be here. Okay, here's my A. 1/2 step below A is that harmonic minor note. So, all right, see how this is working? So I already know 2 of my 3 notes if I was able to get through part 2 and 3 of this lesson. All right, so the third note is not too hard to find after you already know 2 of the 3 of them. All right, so. Or if I'm up here on the 12th to 14th fret region. So here's an A up here on the 14th fret of the G string. I can find my 5th of that note by going to the D string and staying on the same fret. So there's the note E. That's one of my chord tones. My A is here, 14th fret of the G string. 1/2 step lower than that would be that harmonic minor note. So I have these 2 notes. And then back up to here. Here's an E again. All right, so that's my that's the caged shape for this particular E major chord shape found in this area. So it's a little tricky. It takes a little bit of practice, but that's why I'm kind of doing this lesson in a progressive manner like this. Okay, so we already found 2 of our notes. Now you just have to try and find your 3rd note of that E major arpeggio, and having an understanding of cage definitely helps you out with that. Okay, so another thing that you can do over this major 5 chord is to play a diminished arpeggio. So before you get scared and turn the video off, because I know that a lot of people get intimidated by the whole, when they hear diminished arpeggio, they think, it's too much for me. Well, it's actually really not that hard. If you know your pentatonic scale and you've learned more than one position of the pentatonic scale, that is actually harder than this diminished arpeggio thing. So diminished arpeggio may seem like some kind of advanced theory, but it's actually not that hard. It's actually a very simple thing to understand because it's a symmetrical shape. So I have 2 other lessons that I made about this, which go more into detail about the theory behind diminished arpeggios and stuff like that. You can check them out below. But just understand that this is a symmetrical shape. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So here is a diminished arpeggio. We're going to start on the 4th fret. It's just a series of 1.5 steps. So if you started on the 4th fret here, you would go 1.5 steps higher. You would go 1.5 steps higher. You would go 1.5 steps higher. 1.5 steps higher. That's a diminished arpeggio. That's all it is. It's just you start on a fret, you count 3 frets higher, or 1.5 steps, and that's your next note. You can also move across the strings in this shape. Alright, it's all the same thing. So doing what I just did there is the same as this. Alright, so you can also stay in one position and kind of play this shape here. Alright, so that one may be a little tricky. That may be the hardest one to remember. But once you remember that shape and you remember these kind of interval spacings of this diminished arpeggio thing, you can do the exact same thing every 3 frets because it's exactly the same every 3 frets. Alright, so if you did this here, you started on the 4th fret, you could then come up to the 7th fret and do the exact same thing. And then you can do the exact same thing starting on the 10th fret. You can do the same thing starting on the 13th fret. Alright, or you can just kind of do 3 notes at a time. You could do something like, matter which particular pattern you want to do within this diminished arpeggio framework, it doesn't matter because it's exactly the same and it repeats itself every 3 frets. So that's the one thing to keep in mind, and that's why I personally think that once you kind of memorize this diminished arpeggio shape, then it's actually really not that hard. It's harder to memorize the 5 pentatonic positions or something like that than it is to memorize this diminished arpeggio shape. Okay, so why does this work? So number one, all of these notes of this diminished arpeggio are part of this framework that we're already playing in. So we're in this natural minor framework combined with the harmonic minor scale, which is just the gray dot. So it's just a 1 note difference between natural minor and harmonic minor. So you have your A minor scale. You have your harmonic minor scale. Okay, so that's our framework all up and down the entire neck of the guitar. The red dots that you see are your diminished arpeggio notes, and as you can see, all of those fall right into this framework, with one of the notes being the harmonic minor note. So it's all part of this framework. So the fact that the harmonic minor note is one of the diminished arpeggio notes, that can be a trigger to help you find a good starting point for your diminished arpeggio. Because anytime you're soloing, no matter where you happen to be in key, as long as you know where your scale root is, which is A, 1/2 step lower than A is that harmonic minor note, and it's also could be used as a diminished arpeggio starting note. Okay, so if I am playing my A minor scale here, I lower by 1/2 step. Alright, see how that works? So it's always like that. And then if I just wanted to take that pattern and move it up 3 frets, I could do that. Move it up 3 more frets. Alright, and then another thing is it creates a lot of tension. What tension is it means that it has a pull to want to come back to the 1 chord. So if A minors are 1 chord, the diminished arpeggio really creates a feel that you really want to pull back to that 1 chord. Or better stated, it kind of, you want to get back into your natural minor scale type of box or natural minor type of framework or something like that. So let me explain what I mean. So if you have a chord progression that goes like this, A minor to G major to F major to E major, it sounds unresolved. But as soon as I go back to the A minor, it sounds like that tension is gone and it did what it felt like it should do. So So that same concept of creating tension can be applied to the diminished arpeggio being the tension creator versus playing within the A natural minor scale being the resolution, the feeling of resolution. So let's say I'm just noodling around in my A minor scale. Then I want to create tension. I go to my diminished arpeggio. Back to resolution. Okay, so I threw in one of these diminished arpeggios when I was playing the demo in the beginning. I was up here between the 12th and 15th fret. There's my root note, 12th fret of the A string. 1/2 step lower than that is a starting point for my diminished arpeggio. You see how as soon as I get out of that diminished arpeggio and I go back into other notes of this scalar framework, it sounds resolved. Okay, so that was the idea. And that note right there is out of the diminished arpeggio, but still back in the key scale, and it gives me that sense of resolution again. So these diminished arpeggios are really cool. You throw them in there, you throw them in over the 5 chord. The 5 chord in and of itself creates the tension, creates the feeling of wanting to pull back to the the tonic chord, the A minor chord, but you throw in one of those diminished arpeggios on top of that, then it's just super tense. It has that really, really, really just strong pull to want to come back to the 1 chord. So that's diminished arpeggios. If you want to learn more about that, check out the other lessons that I linked you to below. Okay, so those are the 5 things to be aware of when you're trying to get this Spanish type of sound out of your playing. Number 1, be aware of the chord combination, the minor 1 chord in combination with the major 5 chord. You can throw in other diatonic chords, but it's really that minor 1, major 5 combination that gives it that characteristic sound. Number 2, once you know your key scale, which in this case is A minor, be aware of where that 5th is. So you can find your 5ths pretty easily. It's always going to be on the same fret, but just 1 string lower, with the exception of the B string. That's where your 5th is located. Know where that note is. Also know how to switch to your harmonic minor scale. Your harmonic minor scale is just a 1 note difference from the natural minor scale. It's the 1 note that is 1 note less than the root note. That's your harmonic minor note. Play that over the 5 chord. Then you can play the full arpeggio of the 5 chord over the 5 chord to really strengthen that sound. And then you can create all kinds of extra cool tension and really get that neoclassical Yngwie Malmsteen type of sound by throwing in diminished arpeggios every time that 5 chord occurs. There's other places you can use diminished arpeggios also. That's in that other lesson that I linked you to below. So that's going to conclude this lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to check out my site, zombieguitar.com. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.